Well, that was something. Hi, welcome back to the Philip DeFranco Show. Your expectations were probably already low, but Donald Trump, he delivered his long-awaited speech in Davos today, and it was, how do I describe this?
They called me daddy, right, last time? Very smart man said, he's our daddy. We're bringing back battleships. The media's terrible. We are going to build a dome, the Autopen. He was the Autopen president. Some of these stupid people like Powell, they raise interest rates. We're going to hit 50,000, and that stock market's going to double. Fences are gone. We don't have to worry about fences anymore. Somalian bandits. Can you believe that Somalia, they turned out to be higher IQ than we thought? Armenian, Azerbaijan. I don't feel old, but I'm among the older. They emptied their mental institutions into the United States. 2 weeks later, they get a call, your son's head's been blown off. No, Donald, I will not do that. I said, yes, you will, 100%. Sir, everything you've done has been perfectly executed. I said, I know.
I think the words I was looking for was batshit crazy. Though I will say there was also interest in what was going on with Trump before he arrived, because he showed up to the Swiss resort where this summit of global elites took place 3 hours late because Air Force One had what they called a minor electrical issue and they had to turn around. And so reportedly Trump had to skip his planned executive time to make it to the speech on schedule, which I guess along with the field day that Mother Nature has had with the meat inside of his skull, maybe that explains what came out of his mouth. But, where we'll start is with the topic that really everyone was waiting for. Greenland.
Big, beautiful piece of ice. It's hard to call it land. It's a big piece of ice.
With Trump claiming that no nation or even group of nations is in any position to secure Greenland except the United States, and then arguing that the situation that we're in today is pretty much comparable to the height of World War II.
When Denmark fell to Germany after just 6 hours of fighting and was totally unable to defend either itself or Greenland. So the United States was then compelled, we did it, we felt an obligation to do it, to send our own forces to hold the Greenland territory, and hold it we did. Without us, right now you'd all be speaking German and a little Japanese, perhaps.
Then you have him saying that after the war we were stupid to give Greenland back to Denmark, yet the Danes are ungrateful for it now. But of course you have critics pointing out that no matter how dire Trump thinks the threat from Russia or China is, it still doesn't explain why he needs to own it rather than just having military access that we have now. And so today you actually had him trying to give two reasons.
Number one, legally it's not defensible that way, totally. And number two, psychologically, who the hell wants to defend a license agreement or a lease?
But that then brings you to the big question that everyone's been wondering. Is he actually going to try to invade Greenland? Especially because yesterday when someone asked him about it, he gave this chilling answer.
How far are you willing to go to acquire Greenland?
You'll find out.
But in today's speech, while he sort of provided some reassurance, it actually is a little ambiguous if you hear it in the context with the first thing that he said.
We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
Also, you had Trump spending a lot of time relentlessly bashing NATO to the point where it's not even clear why he hasn't just pulled out of it already. Or with him claiming, falsely of course, that the United States paid for 100% of it, literally said trillions and trillions of dollars, and yet we got absolutely nothing in return.
What does the United States get out of all of this work, all of this money, other than death, destruction, and massive amounts of cash going to people who don't appreciate what we do? They don't appreciate what we do. They have to work on Ukraine. We don't. The United States is very far away. We have a big, beautiful ocean separating us. We have nothing to do with it.
And so you had Trump saying that in return for all it is supposedly given to NATO, all he wants is little old Greenland, just one little baby island.
A piece of ice. Cold and poorly located. It's a very small ask.
We should also note when he says it's a piece of ice, it's not exactly clear whether he knows what country he's talking about anymore, because multiple times during the speech, he appears to confuse Greenland with Iceland.
They're not there for us on Iceland, that I can tell you. I mean, our stock market took the first dip yesterday because of Iceland. So Iceland's already cost us a lot of money.
But then when the reporter Libby Dean pointed this out on X, you had White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt responding, "No, he didn't, Libby. His written remarks referred to Greenland as a piece of ice because that's what it is." And then adding, because I guess we're supposed to deny what our eyes and ears just consumed, "You're the only one mixing anything up here." Right, and then with Greenland under US ownership, Trump says he'll build the Golden Dome, which will protect not just the United States, but also Canada. Yet Canada, they're also ungrateful. And here, Trump made what seemed to be a veiled threat against its prime minister, Mark Carney.
Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
With that referring to Carney's speech yesterday, which we covered, and you can pause and go watch it if you want, but in a nutshell, he warned that the rules-based international order is collapsing in no small part thanks to Trump, and that any remaining like-minded democracies have to stick together to survive. And so clearly, Trump didn't like that, and for everyone else, he laid out the deal with Greenland nice and simple, mob boss style.
They have a choice. You can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember.
Also, speaking of picking sides and trying to get on Trump's good side, you had Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff telling CNBC that as many as 25 countries have signed on to join his so-called Board of Peace, though not all have said so publicly, or that Board of Peace that he invited Putin and Lukashenko to, among others. But then, later on in the day, the international situation just got crazier and crazier because first, you had the European Union announcing that it would be halting work on the formal approval and implementation of the trade deal that it struck with Donald Trump last year, or with an EU official saying, given the continued and escalating threats, including tariff threats against Greenland and Denmark and their European allies, we have been left with no alternative. And adding that until the United States decides to re-engage on a path of cooperation rather than confrontation, no steps to move the deal forward would be taken. But also now, it's unclear what the hell is going to happen because you had Donald Trump claiming on Truth Social, based upon a very productive meeting that I have had with the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, we have formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and in fact, the entire Arctic region, saying this solution, if consummated, will be a great one for the United States of America and all NATO nations. Based upon this understanding, I will not be imposing the tariffs that were scheduled to go into effect on February 1st, and saying additional discussions are being held concerning the Golden Dome as it pertains to Greenland. Further information will be made available as discussions progress. And here, while you had Trump supporters saying, hey, it's the art of the deal, Trump's getting what he wants, you then also had pretty much everyone else saying this is just another version of Taco, or saying Trump always chickens out. Right? Many saying this is Trump trying to take an off-ramp and essentially surrendering to NATO, but really we won't know until we see how this plays out. That is, if 95% of people haven't moved their focus to something else. But then also, as far as the non-foreign policy stuff that Trump talked about during his speech, he said that the 2020 election was rigged again, and then he made this announcement.
People will soon be prosecuted for what they did. It's probably breaking news, but it should be.
Trump then made another threat against a sitting Democratic lawmaker.
We actually are helping Minnesota so much, but they don't appreciate it. Most places do. And then we have this fake congressperson who they just reported is worth $30 million. You believe this? Ilhan Omar, talking about the Constitution provides me. She comes from a country that's not a country, and she's telling us how to run America. Not going to get away with it much longer, let me tell you.
You know, despite the countless tangents and the rambling, what Trump calls the weave, others call sundowning, Trump, he said that the real purpose of this speech was to explain to the world how he achieved his economic miracle so that they too can copy his methods for their own countries. And there you got him going down the list of same old talking points: tariffs, tax cuts, Doge cuts, deregulations, closed borders, and none of that woke-ass renewable energy.
One thing I've noticed is that the more windmills a country has, the more money that country loses and the worse that country is doing.
And then, of course, you know, what is a Trump speech nowadays without him throwing out all his favorite numbers that he wants people to believe? He said 8 wars ended, $18 trillion invested from abroad, prescription drug prices down 400, 500, 600, even 1,000 and 2,000%, which again is just not mathematically possible. But, you know, even though Trump's attempts to paint himself as a global economic savior, a genius, has had a tepid response abroad, he still has plans to continue that messaging here in the United States. But just like in Davos, it might be met with skepticism. And even though Trump has continually called it a Democratic hoax, he's going to ramp up his domestic travel ahead of the midterms to push messaging on affordability. His chief of staff, Susie Walz, telling Bloomberg he's going to travel every week, and it actually looks like his first stop is Iowa, where he's slated to speak there next week. And it does make sense that Trump needs to make a big shift into midterms mode right now because the economy is a very big and key issue on the ballot, and no matter what he says on stage, the country isn't pleased with him. But according to an AP poll, half of the country feels that both the country and national economy are worse off compared to when Trump took office a year ago. 43% also believe he's harmed job creation, and over half think that he's hurt the cost of living and healthcare, up from around just 40% in April. And this is a big deal because back in November of 2024, which, you know, it seems like a lifetime ago, the economy was one of the biggest factors motivating Trump's voters. It's arguably one of the biggest reasons he was put into office in the first place, but now his approval on the issue, it's tanking with the general public. Also with this, his cabinet's supposed to join Trump on the domestic travel blitz, and it does seem like they have a lot to make up for as, you know, they face backlash for sounding out of touch on a number of issues related to affordability. I mean, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, for example, he also spoke at Davos, and while discussing bans on institutional investors buying single-family homes, he suggested that your average retiree, they might own a dozen houses.
We are going to give guidance at some point to see what is a mom and pop that someone, maybe your parents for their retirement, about 5, 10, 12 homes. So we don't want to push the mom and pops out. We just want to push everyone else out.
In his words, they just got torn apart, with many saying it just makes the Trump administration look like they're totally out of touch with the reality that Americans live in. And Besson is by no means the only person making these kinds of comments. Just last week, you had Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins doing an interview on the administration's new dietary guidelines and insisting it is very affordable to feed a family on that advice.
We've run over 1,000 simulations. It can cost around $3 a meal for a piece of chicken, a piece of broccoli, corn tortilla, and one other thing. And so there is a way to do this that actually will save the average American consumer money.
With just so many people appalled that she was suggesting that, yes, of course, it is very affordable to feed your family. Just give them like 3 bites of food. And so there you saw Democrats seizing on this, writing things like Trump gets a gold-plated new ballroom, you get a piece of chicken, broccoli, and 1 corn tortilla. And all of this, it just compounds Trump's and the GOP's fear that affordability could cost them the midterms. You might think, well, based on the way that his cabinet's speaking and Trump's own Davos speech mess, is the best strategy to spread these people all over the country to continue talking about the issue. And well, there is at least a reason to put Trump center stage. Or with Politico explaining that this ramp up, it comes with the knowledge that his presence in states and personal endorsements have boosted candidates in prior elections. And so, part of their strategy is to look at the history of his base and that Trump's base does connect when he has boots on the ground. But Trump, especially during these midterms, he has to appeal to more than just his core base. And a lot of the polling shows that he's just losing more and more independence. And no matter where he is or what he and his team say about anything from Greenland to housing to grocery prices, Americans, they're living their own lives every day and feeling the realities of his policies. And just many, they're not seeing the extraordinary economy that Trump's talking about. And then, there's more we're gonna dive into in just a minute, but first, let me say, I need to confess something. You're gonna think I'm so brave for finally saying it, but I want bakery level bread without bakery level effort, like artisan loaf energy, zero kneading, zero questionable life choices. And that's why today's sponsor, Wildgrain, immediately won me over. Wildgrain delivers frozen, baked from home breads, pastas, and pastries that taste like they came from a place with a line out the door. Everything's made with slow, fermented, artisanal dough. It's not just good, it's better for you. Pull it out of the freezer, pop it in the oven, and suddenly your house smells like you know what you're doing. We're talking crusty sourdough, fluffy dinner rolls, fresh pasta, croissants, the kind of stuff that people compliment and you just nod like, yeah, obviously. And Wildgrain's boxes, they're customizable, right? Along with their variety box, they also offer gluten-free, vegan, and a new protein box. And a bonus, every box includes at least 1 new seasonal item, so you're always discovering something new. And they're not cutting corners, no preservatives, no weird fillers, just real ingredients and real flavor. It's perfect for weeknights, hosting, and anytime you want carbs that feel intentional instead of regret-based. Plus, every box donates 2 meals to a food security nonprofit, which means carbs with a conscience. So hey, here's the move. Just scan that QR code or go to wildgrain.com/DeFranco for $30 off your first box and free croissants for life. Yes, really, croissants forever. So wildgrain.com/DeFranco and let future you enjoy better bread. But then, getting right back into the news, Trump's DOJ is now ramping up an investigation into top Minnesota Democrats over their opposition to his immigration crackdown. Right, they've subpoenaed at least 6 state and local officials who have spoken out, including Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, St. Paul Mayor Khalil Herr, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and attorneys for Hennepin County and Ramsey County, which are where Minneapolis and St. Paul are located. And those last 3 are especially notable because they have the power to open investigations into alleged crimes into their jurisdictions, including the killing of Renee Good. But also, experts say that the subpoenas could make that more difficult. Though also, investigating, it's already a challenge. And that's because the Trump FBI, they've reportedly withheld access to evidence and otherwise refused to work with state and local authorities. But in any case, you had Ellison telling reporters that the subpoena that his office received was only for records and documents and not for him personally, though he also went on to accuse Trump of targeting his office because it just filed a lawsuit alleging that the administration's mass deployment of immigration agents to the state, that violated the Constitution. With Ellison also adding, let's be clear about why this is happening. Donald Trump is coming after the people of Minnesota, and I'm standing in the way, and saying I will not be intimidated and I will not stop working to protect Minnesotans from Trump's campaign of retaliation and revenge. You also had Walz calling the whole thing political theater aimed at intimidating public servants, and you had Frey similarly accusing the government of weaponizing its power to try to intimidate local leaders for just doing their jobs. And actually, very notably, the subpoena that Frey received, unlike Ellison's, it's apparently directed at him personally, and it asks him to appear before a grand jury on February 3rd, telling him to bring all records and communications relating to compliance or lack of compliance with immigration immigration detainers in the state of Minnesota. But then also, right, all these subpoenas, they reportedly don't cite a specific criminal statute, right? They're just tied to this recently revealed investigation into whether elected officials' criticism of the crackdown in Minnesota amounts to a conspiracy to impede federal law enforcement. And as we've seen with this Trump administration, despite this apparently being an open investigation, the officials, they haven't hesitated to breach standard DOJ practice and just throw around serious accusations before it's finished. And so you're seeing things like Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche recently accusing Walz and Frey of encouraging violence against law enforcement and even referring to their actions as terrorism. Though to be clear here, what we have actually heard from Walz and Frey is harshly worded criticism.
Get the fuck out of Minneapolis.
Walz has also openly encouraged citizens to record video of any arrests or other encounters between ICE agents and members of the public to create a database of potential future prosecution or wrongdoing by federal law enforcement. And so with everything that's actually been happening rather than what's being alleged, it has legal experts saying that, they're skeptical that there's any real substance to the case, which is then especially notable when you consider the resources that are being devoted to this ridiculousness instead of investigating and maybe even bringing charges against Jonathan Ross, the agent who shot and killed Renee Good on camera. Because on that note, the Trump DOJ, they're actually looking into potential connections between Good, her partner, and left-wing protesters in Minnesota. That is where this administration's priorities are. And that decision also led to the resignation last week of 6 prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minneapolis. And that actually includes one who oversaw the fraud investigation that Trump and his allies have repeatedly used to criticize Democratic leaders in the state and justify the initial surge of agents. Right, and that is actually one of the reasons why the department is extremely short-staffed in Minnesota, with another being that many prosecutors left last year as the administration offered buyouts and encouraged them to quit. And so now what you've been seeing is the Trump administration bringing in prosecutors and agents from other states, apparently not just to keep working on that fraud investigation, but to pursue criminal charges against protesters that it says have impeded the activities of ICE agents. Though also a big thing with that is despite Trump officials repeatedly claiming that the protesters have just been out there breaking the law left and right, you had the Washington Post reporting this week that only 7 people have actually been charged with assaulting or impeding federal agents since December. And in fact, only 2 have been charged since the killing of Renee Good on January 7th. But also, that's not to say that there haven't been people getting swept up in this. It's just that they're not protesters. Right? You had CBP Commander Gregory Bovino, who you probably know because he's been out there doing his best SS cosplay, revealing recently that officers have made 3,000 immigration arrests in the past 6 weeks. And that is, you had DHS Secretary and ICE Barbie Christie Noem claiming that 10,000 have been arrested in Minneapolis overall and describing them as criminal illegal aliens who were killing Americans, hurting children, and raining terror. But also, if you don't already, here's a reason to doubt that that description applies to all or even most of them. Because despite claims that they're going after the worst of the worst, it's been reported that ICE has arrested thousands of people who have only minor offenses from traffic violations to weed possession. And understand, that's also as the agency has reportedly arrested tens of thousands of people with no criminal records at all. With a recent CBS analysis of internal government data also finding that less than half of the now record-high detainee population have had criminal charges or convictions in the states. And then on top of all that, you even have local police speaking out against the tactics being used by at least some federal agents in the Twin Cities, including their alleged targeting of people based just on the appearance of race. I mean, you literally had the police chief of one Minneapolis suburb revealing at a news conference yesterday that multiple off-duty officers in his department had been targeted by ICE and that all had been people of color, saying,
I wish I could tell you that this was an isolated incident. In fact, many of the chiefs standing behind me have similar incidents with their off-duty officers. If it is happening to our officers, it pains me to think of how many of our community members are falling victim to this every day.
And then with that, you also had the sheriff of Hennepin County agreeing that people were being stopped, questioned, and harassed solely because of the color of their skin, and adding,
we demand more from our federal government, more professionalism, more accountability, more humanity. We demand lawful policing that respects human dignity.
And then again, just to continue this point, you had St. Paul's police chief similarly reporting that city employees had been subject to traffic stops that were clearly outside of the bounds of what federal agents are allowed to do. Then with all that, you had Bovino responding to the criticism and defending his agents, saying,
everything we do every day is legal, ethical, moral, well-grounded in law.
And then at the same time, you also had Trump mostly doubling down, but then sort of acknowledging that immigration agents might not be in the right every day. And Trump then also saying he understood both sides of Renee Good shooting and felt terrible about it, and added,
They're going to make mistakes sometimes. ICE is going to be too rough with somebody, or, they're dealing with rough people. They're going to make a mistake. Sometimes it can happen. We feel terribly.
They'll also say regarding the case of Renee Good, we've actually recently been given more reason to think that her death it wasn't just a mistake, but rather the result of callous disregard for her life. And at least for right here, I'm not even talking about the shooting itself, which was horrible, and I've already expressed my viewpoint on it, but what happened after. Because you had NPR News and APM reports analyzing videos, 911 calls, fire department records, and dispatch logs, and they found that it took more than 10 minutes after Good was shot before someone gave her CPR, even though ICE agents are supposedly trained in the procedure. And not only that, ICE agents allegedly left her bleeding and alone in the car for almost 3 minutes, which was apparently the same amount of time that it took before they contacted emergency services in Minneapolis. Now that said, bystanders actually had already called at some point, so first responders were on their way. Though reportedly they then had difficulty reaching the scene because the street was filled with vehicles, many belonging to ICE. And while they were waiting, as we've seen from earlier video, one bystander identifying himself as a physician was actually turned away.
Can I go check a pulse?
No! Back up! Now!
I'm a physician!
I don't care!
And with this, you had a DHS spokesperson defending the ICE agent's response by saying that Good didn't have a pulse, but one, a lack of a pulse is kind of the reason why you would administer CPR, and two, when firefighters arrived on the scene more than 6 minutes after the shooting, they reported that while Good wasn't breathing, she did have a pulse, which was described as thready and irregular. And with that, you had a local doctor who works in an emergency room saying somebody with a thready or diminished pulse is not deceased, and to walk away from an individual at that point is somewhat mind-boggling. And he's not the only Minnesota doctor who's spoken out, with another talking at a press conference and saying,
I learned for the first time through an NPR story that Renee Good still had a pulse 8 minutes after she was shot by an ICE agent. And yet the offer to administer aid from a physician on the scene following his Hippocratic oath was denied. I can't say how much that stirs the blood of everyone behind me here as we try to fulfill our obligation, our oath, and our duty to care for the people of Minnesota.
And actually with that, he was just one of more than a dozen medical professionals who gathered not just to talk about Renee Good, but to explain that their patients, undocumented and citizens alike, they're suffering because of ICE agents in the state and even inside a hospital. Saying, for example, that patients as well as employees, they're afraid to leave home and they're missing appointments and running out of medicine and food. Well, understandably, there's a lot of attention on ICE in Minnesota. ICE isn't just contributing to chaos there, but they might actually be one of the reasons we have a government shutdown. Because Congress, they have until January 30th to pass a funding bill that'll keep the government open. And yesterday, after months of work, you had a group of bipartisan negotiators releasing a 1,000-page deal that would avert a shutdown. But also the funding for ICE, it could block the entire bill from passing, right? Because while the deal, it covers a wide range of things, it would essentially keep ICE funding flat at $10 billion for the rest of the fiscal year. But that funding, it also is on top of the additional $75 billion for detention and enforcement that has already been allocated to ICE in the GOP's big, beautiful bill. Now, of note here, this new bill, it would also reduce funding for enforcement and removal operations slightly by $115 million, and it would require DHS to spend $20 million on body cameras for ICE agents, as well as another $20 million for inspections and oversight for ICE detention facilities. But what you're seeing is that many Democrats have demanded that any ICE funding come with conditions to rein in and reform the agency, especially after the killing of Renee Good. And with that, just last week, you had House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries arguing that the killing showed that clearly there are some common sense measures that need to be put in place to hold ICE accountable and gain Democratic support for a spending bill. Already, you're seeing multiple Democrats saying they will reject this bill if there are no reforms to ICE, including Representative Ro Khanna, who called the deal a surrender to Trump's lawlessness and vowing to help lead the opposition to the funding measure. But that said, it's not all cut and dry. You've also had some key Democratic lawmakers defending the bill. Senator Patty Murray, for example, the top Democrat on the Senate Appropriations Committee, noted that the bill still rejected many Trump-backed cuts while investing in Democratic issues like education, rental assistance, and medical research. And with that, claiming that a government shutdown over ICE funding wouldn't solve anything because ICE could just continue to operate during a shutdown thanks to the $75 billion in the Trump bill. Right? And noting while ICE would be fine, other key agencies like TSA and FEMA would have their funding shut off. And so she argued the suggestion that a shutdown in this moment might curb the lawlessness of this administration is not rooted in reality, and adding, in a shutdown, this administration can do everything they are already doing, but without any of the critical guardrails and constraints imposed by a full-year funding bill. And actually, at the same time, over in the House, you had the top Democratic appropriator, Representative Rosa DeLauro, voicing her support for the bill, though notably, she didn't really appear to encourage her colleagues to embrace the deal that she helped negotiate. DeLauro openly acknowledging that the package didn't include the broad reforms that Democrats had demanded, and adding, I understand that many of my Democratic colleagues may be dissatisfied with any bill that funds ICE. I share their frustration with the out-of-control agency, but adding, I encourage encourage my colleagues to review the bill and determine what is best for their constituents and communities. And so with all that, as far as what happens next over in the House, they're expected to vote on the measure later this week, and they should be able to pass it most likely, as long as basically all the Republicans vote in favor, or if a few Democrats join most Republicans. And in the Senate, that's a different question, right? They're not even in session until next week, meaning that they have just mere days to avert a shutdown. And because 60 senators are needed to pass the legislation, Republicans will need Democrats to get on board. That could be hard, not only because Democrats view the bill as a blank check to fund ICE without any conditions, but also because it doesn't address the Obamacare subsidies that expired at the beginning of the year. But that, my friends, you beautiful bastards, is where your Wednesday Philip DeFranco show is gonna end. But hey, 1, I'll see you right back here tomorrow for another dive into the news, and 2, I've got more for you to watch actually right now, because I also just released the newest episode of my podcast, Crashing Out with myself and Alex Perlman, and it was something. It's been blowing up, and we'd love to have you.
Talk to me about gay hockey.
How do you get on a board of peace without, paying your Trump tithe?
2022, I was like,
What if I try to take over the world? What if I do that before I die?
Which one do you think is the best Cars movie? Cars on the Road?
Not the one where he became a spy.
We're gonna get into all of the horrors of the world, but give us a moment here.